We're advancing to the higher and more refined uses of equanimity. As I said at the beginning, there's two branches basically of equanimity. One is the function of stability and balance in the midst of activity, in the midst of ideas, in the midst of communication with others. In the midst of the polarities of life, of success and failure, praise and blame, good fortune, bad fortune, obscurity and fame. So that's one kind of equanimity, one species of equanimity. And profoundly useful and would be the predominant use of or application of equanimity even for an arahant or even a monk that's living in seclusion, because there's only so much time that you can actually be in pure samadhi meditation. So that's the other form of equanimity. It's really a very spacious stillness is what it is. And there's no application of it to sort of ordinary life. It's a specialized, extraordinary life. And what it does is characteristic of the fourth jhana. So this is the tone, the emotion of the fourth jhana. We proceed to you don't just go to the fourth jhana usually, and through history, there have been various phases in the Sangha and in the lay community of the assessment of the possibilities of jhana, both for monastics and for lay people, how applicable it is, how necessary it is, how possible it is. And the jhanas keep going in and out of fashion, going in and out of attainability. It's obvious if we go back to the time of the Buddha, he's a strong advocate of jhanic practice, and you have, it seems, people are attaining jhana by the boatload, and indeed the stages of enlightenment by the boatload, and not just monastics. The lay community is as well. The lay community meditates. They don't go on retreats. They meditate mostly at home, and they come to visit the monastery whenever they can. Monastery, fortunately, is just about half a mile away, just through the woods. And so you can go over there anytime. Monks are living in small dwellings, and they'll be there in the morning passing through your village on alms round. So you'll see them every day. And you will have an opportunity to go over and talk to certain monks who are available to speak to. And you get to know them, and you invite them also for meals at your house. And sometimes you bring food over to the monastery, but they would be on alms round on a daily basis as well. So you have a lot of interaction. But people at that time, they were rice farmers and had various duties and 12 kids and things like that. So it's not like, you take care of the kids, I'm going off to retreat now. So who will feed the water buffaloes. So it's kind of like Thailand in the Isan, the northeast, where I was 25 years ago in Ajahn Chah's monasteries there, surrounded by these farmers and water buffaloes. They're really not coming on retreat, but they're almost in a daily interaction with the monks. And they do show up for formal, long sittings, usually all-night sittings, once a week. And again, in that forest tradition, it seems like a revival of almost the time of the Buddha. You have forest monks seeming to say, some of the great forest masters seeming to say that some of the villagers have attained jhana, even the fourth jhana. And so that's a very profound state, the fourth jhana. In different countries, at the same time, like if you went to Sri Lanka or Burma, they would have a very different opinion of whether this was possible or even what lay people should be doing. I think in Sri Lanka, up to very recently, the idea of even the monks attaining jhana was kind of doubtful. The practice had fallen away. And in Burma, there was a huge emphasis on vipassana practice, kind of revival of practice, both for lay people and for monastics, but with a very strong bias towards this exclusively vipassana meditation rather than any form of jhana meditation. So you see this kind of spread out attitudes to these things. And you see it also in history when you read the commentaries. By the time you get about 1,000 years after the Buddha, you get the Visuddhimagga's versions of the jhanas, they seem to make it like, whoa, 1 in a million people will attain. It's super normal. It's very, very difficult. Especially breath meditation. They had almost given up on breath meditation. They had gone to colored kasinas. And it's very different than if you read a commentary 500 years before, which is would be called the Vimuttimagga. There it seems more accessible, and breath is highly recommended, and different descriptions. So I like to go back to the earliest suttas, really. It's just, I don't trust some of the sociological changes that have gone on in Asia. All kinds of things, attitudes are picked up, and certain beliefs spread. And they're just beliefs. So if you go back to the suttas, the Buddha always says, wherever the Eightfold Path is found, there you will find people of the first, second, third, and fourth stages of enlightenment. Wherever you fulfill the preconditions for the development of samadhi, there you will find people who attain samadhi. So throwing away pessimistic or optimistic ideas about, preconceived ideas about whether you can or cannot attain this, you go back to the Buddha and say, he cuts through it in a very wise way. He said, just put in the causes, quit guessing. Is this possible, is not possible? There's nothing magical in the air at the time in the 5th century. There's nothing magical in the air now. People are fundamentally not different, but it's a matter of whether you put in the causes. So, and I encourage, and I have for a long time, probably since I became a monk, and before that, I was very interested in samadhi practice, concentration practice, jhana practice, before I was a monk as well. And I went off and became a hermit and lived in the woods for years and just practiced that kind of meditation as well. And then when I ordained with Bhante Gunaratana, who's he had written a book on the jhanas, and we talked a lot about it. And it was very unusual for a Sri Lankan monk, first that he was a strong advocate of meditation to begin with, and then that he establishes a forest monastery. And secondly, that he encouraged the practice of and the aspiration to jhana. And so I was never in a school that had any doubts about jhana or the value of it or the possibility of the practice of it. But whatever we think, in my experience, the fourth jhana is quite an outstanding achievement, and it requires, as Bhante Ji used to say, if you want to aspire to jhana, you can't have any other hobbies. Even for monks, you can't have hobbies. There's a very complete commitment of the mind to this, at least for periods of time. And so it's obviously a high art, a fine art, and something you devote yourself to and have to be careful about where your mind goes and etc. if you want to establish these preconditions. One of these preconditions, though, very fortunately, is that to practice equanimity, the wisdom form of equanimity, the one in interaction. So a life that is led equanimously also sets up the preconditions for the development of samadhi. Because in order to be equanimous in everyday life, you have to have a very high practice of mindfulness. You have to keep being aware of when you're losing it, when you're losing your balance, when you're getting carried away, when you're falling into a hindrance, a psychic irritant. And so that is very, very good preconditions for the establishment of when you get a chance to sit beautifully undisturbed in a quiet room by yourself or in a meditation retreat. This is a very good preliminary approach to allow the mind to go towards the equanimity which is found in the jhanas, in the samadhi state. When you practice this, and this is information, I don't necessarily expect anybody in the room to just, tomorrow, now that you got the instructions, to go to the fourth jhana, but it might happen. It's important, though, that people hear about this and know about this. Otherwise, well, how are you going to expect anybody? There's no reason to think that people who have the capacity might show up at a monastery. Why are you here anyway? Why isn't everybody else here? Why do only a small number of people come to monasteries? Because from a Buddhist point of view, you are inclined this way. It would never have occurred to you to come here if you haven't some inclination to this. Just like you don't go to a concert if you're not interested in music. You have some inclination. You have a little scanning device on the top of your head. You may not have noticed it, but it's scanning the horizon always for things that are in line with its interest, its primary, deeper interest, your continuous search for existential truth. And then you're scanning the horizon like this, and when anything comes across something that gets interested, and you go there. So it's not an accident. It's not just a random sample of the population that arrives at the monastery. So you might have talent. You might have the capacity, the talent. So that's why it's important to not keep anything back and not dumb anything down. So we have these retreats where I spend a lot of time talking about these higher practices, and equanimity is one of these higher practices, both in the activity version and also in the stillness version. We also have, extended jhana retreats. In January, we did a full 1 month, invited people to come for a full month to aspire and practice in perfect conditions for jhana. And I think I had conversations in the interviews with some people who felt, and I kind of trust their judgment. They've been at it a long time. Some of them claimed that they had attained the fourth jhana. So it's something that's there, it's good information, it's something to aspire to, and it's something that's extraordinary. It is, in the teaching of the Buddha, it's a supernormal condition. As enlightenment is a supernormal condition, and also the attainment of jhanas are supernormal. One of the rules for monks is they're not allowed to declare any personal attainments of supernormal states to lay people. They can talk about it amongst themselves to other ordained monastics, but they're not supposed to claim supernormal states. And they specifically go into what is a supernormal state, of course, all the stages of enlightenment, but also jhana. So don't expect it to take off in a widespread kind of way. It's very interesting how mindfulness has become very popular. You find it everywhere. It's applied in all kinds of fields. But jhana is really, you're never going to have a large percentage of the population that is going to come anywhere near it. That's the definition of supernormal. It's not normal. And most people are normal. So it's a bell curve, yeah. And jhana is on the sort of the 130 and above IQ thing. It's not IQ though. In fact, your IQ might work against you. Your smarts it's a two-edged sword. Your intelligence is a two-edged sword. The fact that you can use it and you get rewarded for using it, and then you start to use it all the time, and then it becomes a curse. The thing won't stop. It's all you do all day is think about things, because you've been praised for that. That's your talent. You get results you get rewards for that. But it's not really a satisfactory way to live. So jhana is kind of bypassing the endless discursive activity, intellectual discursive activity of the mind, and it is a higher reward. It's a higher and more refined degree of pleasure than anything you can do with the thinking mind. So if you endeavor in this practice of jhana, the characteristic of equanimity doesn't arrive in its fullest form until the deepest states, that is the fourth jhana. What you begin with is not equanimity, but you begin with joy and energy. And it's good not to, some people would like to skip straight to the fourth jhana, skip straight to the equanimity. Usually what happens, and I see this all the time, is you just fall asleep. You just nod off. I talk in many of my retreats, I give this analogy of bicycling, going out for a nice bicycle ride. And it's really good exercise, and you're out in the fresh air, and it's not always on the flat, you have to pedal. And sometimes you have to pedal up to the top of a very big hill, and on the other side, though, you can coast. You can stop pedaling and just let the breeze blow through your hair, and it's a beautiful no-pedal coasting. But you can't coast before you get to the top of the hill. If you stop pedaling, you just stop. So a lot of energy and joy has to be put in before you can stop pedaling and see if the bicycle will still keep going. And that's what happens in this development of samadhi. You need to make it joyful and interesting and energetic. You have to exert yourself to get there. And it's not exactly pure peace or quiet yet. That only can come as a resultant of having developed the first part of the endeavor, and that is a good deal of energy and positive, joyful endeavor has to be put in before you can get to this state of breathless stillness. When I say breathless, I actually literally mean it. The respirations, one of the most best objective measurements of your samadhi is the respirations per minute. I don't know exactly. My guess is that the brain uses up requires a lot of oxygen to do certain types of functions. And now notice that a person who's quite emotional or angry, their respiration increases. They breathe very fast. And I guess it's a biological inheritance of having to fight or flee. Our respiration has to increase. Excitement and hostility increase respiration rates. Some people who are agitated or restless have a high respiration rate just in normal life. You hear them breathing at the next desk over. They're all, it's slightly unnerving. But a very calm person you probably don't notice their respiration at all. I think ordinary, normal respiration is something like 12 breaths per minute. So if a nurse comes in and checks, I don't know any nurses here, checks on the patient, they will look at their watch and watch the rise and fall of and if it's in the 12 to 15 range, then they're all right. But your breaths per minute will, because you're using your mind in a different way, your respirations per minute will decline. They will fall, and the respirations per minute will become slower. It's not that I guess you're moving into a different part of the brain that doesn't demand that kind of oxygen level, and the brain seems to use 25 or 30% of the whole body's demand. So you will, just even in the first jhana, you will probably, I can't, there's never been a widespread study of this, but I would say that if you're above 3 breaths per minute, you're probably not really even in the first jhana. If your breaths go down to 2.5 breaths per minute, probably you're in. And that would be on a continuous, without feeling that you were lacking for air or anything. I know people practice holding their breath for a long time. There's a whole cult of people holding their breath out there. Like, what is that about it? Get a life. Or come to a retreat at least. I can show you some pleasure instead. You don't have to stop breathing, just slow it down. So this is 2.5 to 3 breaths per minute is the physiological, kind of an objective. It's like something you can also count your breath while you're in the state. You can be aware of the breath numbers. It's not in conflict with samadhi. Picking up this counting, I saw the reason why it ever occurred to me to count my breath was that it actually talks about it in the commentaries. It doesn't talk about it in the suttas, but it's one way to track or help you not lose your attention. So they advise that you count your breaths, like the exhalation, up to 5 or 10. And if your mind wanders, you will lose count. And this helps you know whether your mind is wandering or not. So that led to wondering like how many breaths per minute and so forth. So Harvard Medical School went to Tibet to find out about some of the claims that Tibetan monks had made in history about physiological changes and etc. And they got permission from the Dalai Lama to go into to some of the hermits and monks who were really meditation monks and measure them with all this apparatus. This Dr. Herbert Benson from Harvard. The Dalai Lama felt that there was a lot of scientific skepticism about these claims, and it would be good to just measure them. The monks were resistant to it because it's really you're not supposed to display any supernormal capacities, and so it's a little on the fringe of Vinaya. But the Dalai Lama felt that it was important for the rest of the world to sort of know that these are not just wild claims. So they went in and measured respiration per minute and core temperatures and a lot of different things. And indeed, the number is somewhere around 2.5 breaths per minute in a very deep state of concentration, and then can go down from there. Now, if you read the commentaries, the fourth jhana seems to be the cessation of breathing. It literally says, you stop breathing, and it can alarm you. You think, am I dead? I mean, that's what they say in the commentary. Am I dead? I can't be dead. I'm still alive. They're kind of calming, because as the respiration gets down, it might be a little concerning. I don't really think that they actually stop breathing in the fourth jhana. I think that what they mean is that you don't really, it's so slow and subtle that it's like you're not really breathing. You're losing the capacity to even experience the breath. After all, how do you know this? Because you're getting there, this is in the case, you're getting there by breath meditation. And the whole instructions in the breath meditation is to know you are breathing out and you are breathing in, long or short. And to know I am breathing in, gladdening the mind. So in the early stages, raising joy and energy, breathing in, breathing out, etc. And as you get farther into the sutta on breath meditation, the calmer and more peaceful elements come out. But you remain aware of the breath. However, the more still your mind becomes, the more equanimous your mind becomes, the slower the respirations and the harder it is to detect. And in fact, of course, I think really what happens is that you're not really experiencing breathing. Actually, it's the after image of breathing, the impression of breathing. I don't know, it's like the only thing I can think of is getting off a horse. Have you ever gone for a ride on a horse, half an hour, especially if you're not used to it? After you get off, you can't walk. You walk funny. You can't. Same getting off a sailboat that's rocking a lot. You don't have your land legs. You got your sea legs and your land legs. These are the after mind-made after effects. You retain the mental impression of the experience, and this is in more or less what they call the nimitta. So it's something that you can imagine the stillness. If you didn't have to breathe, how still your mind would have to be. And notice, you all have the experience of having had to have breathing hard and respiration, everything from all kinds of activities and from emotional arguments and stuff. You know about that. So just reverse it and imagine how the stillness and the emotional refinement that would accompany something where you can't even detect that you're breathing anymore. So that is equanimity in the jhanic form of equanimity. And the Buddha has beautiful descriptions of it. Usually for the fourth jhana, he talks about as if a man is covered completely with a white sheet, a clean white sheet over the entire body. No part of the body is left uncovered. So it's just pure white. The form of the body itself is gone. The details of the form of the body, there's no feeling left of the body. So you feel unembodied, you feel bodiless. And your emotional state is exquisitely still and pure. This does not mean there's a nothingness to it. It means that it's the finest and most exquisite sort of pleasure that you can have. You are relieved of all distress and all concern and all future and all past. And you're not conceptualizing, so you're not thinking, I'm in the present. You just are. So all forms of discursive thought have ceased. And so it's this beautiful kind of pure white expanse of without body. It's a very profound, characterized by equanimity, upekkha. You can't stay in that forever, but if you actually kind of go towards that, then this is the source of sort of supernormal or sort of extraordinary psychic capacity to experience and intuit things that you can't in your ordinary condition of mind. You have accounts of all extraordinary things of people under anesthetic or on drugs or in extraordinary situations. Their mind works differently. Even in an accident, or if you fall from a height and survive, people describe their whole life flashing before their eyes in an accelerated way. And obviously, the objective time is only a quarter of a second, half a second, and yet they had this full life experience in that. So your mind can, in certain states of consciousness, your mind can reveal things to you that you cannot possibly get in ordinary states of mind. So that's one of the sort of uses of this fourth jhana. Now, if you remember the story of the Buddha on the night of his awakening, he does not do vipassana. Vipassana hasn't been invented yet, right? So how could the Buddha do vipassana? He does samatha, he does samadhi, he finds his way through the fourth jhana and emerges from that and then has insights into cause and effect that he had not or couldn't access. And it's this structure of cause and effect, what the causes are for the arising of things, that allows his vipassana to arise, his clarity of sight, of the sight of the eye, the wisdom eye, he sees with his mind how things work, how it is that we're bound up, what the cause of distress and suffering is, and how it ceases. So it's off the base of this deep stillness that the insight naturally has arisen from as a result of that. So that's very important to remember that that's the classical format. It's not starting with vipassana because it wasn't invented. It has to start with samadhi, and then out naturally rising and swelling out of samadhi, wisdom arises. That's not the format we have been trained in the West. We don't know any other way to come to solutions except by linear rational thought. But actually, when we look at the history of science, we see that that's not the way a lot of the greatest breakthroughs were made. They weren't made through linear processes. Einstein talks about it. He says, how I came to understand these things was by intuition and music. He played his violin. And he thought about these things, but he liked to be alone and in a quiet room, and things popped into his mind. So that intuition there's no traceable, discursive, linear process which led to that sudden understanding. It's just a sudden understanding that came out of some stillness and balanced by just the playing of music. It must be in a different part of the brain. Newton also says similar things. He lives alone like a hermit his whole life, and he actually uses the word meditation. Silence and meditation are the source of his productivity. Of course, most of his preoccupation was religious. If you look at the total opus of Newton, only a small percentage is physics. The rest is rather eccentric theories about the Bible. So this stillness is not just a source of peace, but also can allow you to solve and resolve all kinds of practical issues that are hard to deal with through just linear processing. And so we have to learn to trust this. Quite astonishing creativity and new ideas come out of stillness. So when you're practicing towards your equanimity, you shouldn't think that it's irrelevant or just not part of the world we live in. It actually can be a very abundant source of new ideas and vision and creative aspects. And also you could shatter your kind of your prejudices, and you just get new ways of seeing things. It kind of softens up the heart. It opens up some of the new pathways to and contexts for seeing things. So it has a lot of practical implications as well. So I will leave that discussion about equanimity as a function of samadhi for tonight, and tomorrow we will talk about the 7 factors of awakening, 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 7th is, surprise, surprise, equanimity.